2/3 of companies are trying to replatform. What is precipitating that need to replatform the market?
Many of them, in my opinion, went to a platform that really was not able to handle the complexity of the B2B operations that they have. The Zuvo and Forrester had that report in 2024, 65% of B2B companies want to replatform e-commerce. Who is the customer of the distributor or the manufacturer? What are they using the system for? And what are the requirements based on that? You want to make sure you have a process to pick the right platform, but then you still have to support it. Hope is not a strategy, right?
All right, Mr. Schneider. So this is what I've heard that's going on, something that I've heard that you're doing. This is the reason I wanted you on the podcast. I've heard that you're trying to streamline this B2B e-commerce platform selection process, and that not just streamline it, but make it more efficient, condense timelines, things like that. Is that true? And if it's true, I want you to tell me about it.
Well, it could be true. Let's get to that in a minute. We've been working on a number of things that are exciting. I guess just to start though, just acknowledging kind of the problem, right? I mean, I don't know if you saw was it Zuvo and Forrester had that report in 2024, 65% of B2B companies want to replatform e-commerce. It's a disease, right? Like we've talked about this for a number of years. B2B companies really struggle with this, and many of them are kind of stuck, right? And so, in a sense, like I don't blame them. Like it's not easy. It's a difficult process. There's not a lot of information out there helping equip people with how they should do this, and so what you find is, in lieu of doing the process kind of right, they talk to somebody they know, or they get sold by one of the vendors who are really good at selling stuff, or they hook on with an agency who has develops on a platform that probably wasn't the best one for them, or whatever. So in the end, they become part of that statistic, right? And so yeah, that's what we're trying to rid the industry of, if we can, is just this idea that people are kind of stuck on these platforms. When 2/3 of the market wants to replatform, and the reality is that so many companies are really struggling to really even get good customer adoption. There's clearly a problem, right? And so the question is, how do we solve that problem? And so what we're trying to do is make sure that the process is done right, and that we have some tools that help it along. And so, when you look at the process historically, the best way to do this is to really make sure that the requirements are fully vetted in advance. Now, not like real detailed requirements like we would go through in an implementation, but at least understanding, when it comes to catalogs, or when it comes to order management, or when it comes to account management, when it comes to, some of these types of things, who is the customer of the distributor or the manufacturer? What are they using the system for? And what are the requirements based on that? And so when you look at the customers and the admins and marketing and all the other people that are kind of involved in the e-commerce platform, like what are all the things that the platform needs to do in order to provide the best experience for customers, right? That's what it's really all about in the end, is making sure that it's the best experience for the customers. And so gathering all those requirements is quite intensive, and it has been in the past. And so, we know from past, like it's lots of spreadsheets, lots of documents, lots of meetings, lots of, interactions. And so what we've done is try to streamline that process with technology, so that we've got surveys doing a lot of the discovery that we used to do, and more importantly, those requirements go into a portal that allows us to make the process very objective for the distributor or manufacturer, right? So now they can see very clearly, and more importantly, they can make sure management understands, or anybody else can clearly see what are the best platforms out of the box for what I need to do.
Let's back up and talk about, you said 2/3 of companies are trying to replatform. Why? Like, what is precipitating that need to replatform in the market?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things potentially, and some of it may not have to do with the platform. I think a lot of customers or a lot of distributors and manufacturers they're frustrated with what they can't do with their platforms. And anecdotally, I would say many of them, in my opinion, went to a platform that really was not able to handle the complexity of the B2B operations that they have. And so I think that's where a lot of times companies, they think, well, any e-commerce platform can work for me. I just need to figure out how to make this one work. Well, that's not exactly the case, because things like account management and some other things get really sticky if you don't have kind of the proper structure. So I think that's where, for a lot of companies, they get stuck. And if anything, that's where they need help. So
I also think there's a lot of companies that have, when they start into e-commerce, they kind of hit on the ERP add-ons or the platforms that kind of go along with the ERP. And eventually they, not that those were necessarily bad platforms, they just kind of hit the
right.
high end of what those things are capable of. So now they're trying to move on. Jay, before we talk about like what you're doing differently and streamlining it, what is the traditional way that people select platforms, and what's the problem with that? What's the problem with the process?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different potential problems depending on which path people choose. So I think some people don't really understand that they need to develop requirements, that they need to understand, that their business is a little more complex, and they may have catalog issues, or complexity around order management, or just multiple distribution centers, or whatever it is, or branches, et cetera. So all of those things kind of add to the complexity. And so I think a lot of people may not necessarily understand that. And so they don't build those requirements out. And because of that, they, go out and start talking to vendors right away. And, vendors are really good at kind of controlling the narrative, right? Making the demo look really great. And so what ends up happening is they may get kind of sold by whoever had the best demo, right? So that's one path. I think other companies go maybe directly to an agency and have an agency either do text selection for them, or they end up, inherently on a platform that agencies are developing on. And so in a sense, they've kind of short-circuited the process already, because agencies know the platforms they know. They obviously don't know the ones that they don't develop on very, very often or ever. So that's another challenge, I think, for a lot of companies. And then I think there are a number of, and I'll tell you, I've talked to some consultants and other people that are helping with platform selection, and features and functionality are not requirements, right? That's not how the system needs to work for you. Those are, features that you want to have for your customer or whatever. So there's a level of detail below that will actually help you figure out which platforms are best for you. And so they may take any of those different paths, calling the vendors first, calling agencies first, or hiring other consultants who maybe just think that features and functionality are as deep as you need to go. And so inherently they end up on something that doesn't handle their business long term. And to your point, I think when a lot of companies got into e-commerce, I think they were so scared about things like integration. So it became an easy sell for the ERP vendor or whomever had an out-of-the-box integration with the ERP platform they were on, whether it was Profit 21 or Eclipse or Sage or whatever it was. And so those are the platforms that they ended up on because it was easy.
Do you find that, I don't know if this is true anymore. This is true 5 years ago, that companies really struggled to even understand what the requirements should be.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
if you sat down with the manufacturer and distributor and say, what do you want? You kind of get blank stares
Right.
versus being guided through a process of, like, these are typical requirements. Do these fit you? Do these not? Or talking through their own business processes and
Right.
understanding the business process, understanding how things are ordered and developing requirements from them. But asking a manufacturer distributor what requirements they have or
Mm-hmm.
use cases, it used to be they couldn't even figure that out.
They don't, and I think the industry is very focused on things like features and functionality, right? So a
Yeah.
feature might be, I want to have quoting, right? Well, that's great, but there's a lot of things that go into quoting, right? And now we need to be able to understand, what are the types of things inside of quoting that have to operate a certain way to make it best for you.
Right.
And so
Then
that's where
how
I
is that
think
integrated back to the ERP to actually have
exactly
that quote available in the ERP so
right.
someone can close it offline?
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. So those are some of the areas like the quoting, the catalogs. Oftentimes, not oftentimes necessarily, but a lot of companies have customers that have specific catalogs, right? Because they are a contract customer, right? They have products that were built or manufactured entirely for them, or they have different product numbers, or they have a different geography that they can sell to with certain suppliers, right? So there's complexity in catalogs a lot of times, and so what you have to be able to do is understand, like, how do those need to be built? Are they built by SKU? Are they built by manufacturer? Are they built by categories? Those types of things. And so that's the level of detail that I think people are struggling with. They just know, well, I need to be able to do multiple catalogs, right? There's a lot that goes into that, obviously.
After someone does requirements, let's assume, like, in the old way of doing something. So in the old way of doing something, you're saying that you basically get a list of features that you need that are kind of 1-0 answers, right? True,
Right.
false answers
Yes.
versus the nuance of the business.
Hmm.
And then what happens in the old way? What happens with that list of features? Like, what happens next?
I think what happens a lot of times is people take that list of features out and, start bumping it up against platforms that are out there. And, platforms will often, obviously have they've got their checklist, right? They want you to know that yes, we handle quoting, yes, we handle custom catalogs, yes, we handle all of those things, and they do. That's not a lie, right? The question is, how do they do that, though? And inside of that is where you're going to find, because at the end of the day, what our goal should be is to find the platform that is closest out of the box to your requirements as a distributor or a manufacturer, right?
Hmm.
And so why do we want that? Well, we want that because that's what's going to produce the least amount of customization, right? We could do anything we want with any of these platforms. The problem is that by the time you get done with all the customization, not only is it a large implementation project originally, but the long-term maintenance of that becomes, unsustainable for a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you bump it up. When you say bump it up, you mean like just send RFP type documents out to, and vendors answer. Well, how long was this? How long did this process typically take?
Yeah, usually pretty time intensive. I mean, if you it would depend on scheduling and stuff like that, obviously. But I think oftentimes, discovery would take a couple weeks, and then putting the RFP together would take a few weeks, and so you're talking about months by the time you go back and forth between the distributor or manufacturer who's engaging in the process, and all of the vendors. It could easily be a couple of months just to find out, do they have the features or functionality that you're looking for. So
I remember thinking that almost in all cases, someone selected a platform and didn't really understand what the platform was all about.
mm-hmm. Oh, and I think that's true to a degree in every case, right? You're never going to know until you're using it every day what the platform is like. And I think that's, where
but even the pros and
objectivity.
cons, like they didn't understand. Okay, what it's a little bit like when I select this, I at least know what these three problems are going to be when I select it,
Mm-hmm.
and these three pros are going to be when I select it, and then versus the others, and making a choice between, like, I'm accepting the faults that it has, because
Right.
every platform has faults,
Right.
but they don't even have that kind of basic understanding of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think in most cases, people get the implementation done, they launch the store, and then they figure out what problems they're going to have, right?
Right.
And
kind of backwards.
It is kind of backwards, right? And additionally, I think one of the challenges is, you have whoever implemented this. This is one of the things that I think is a real challenge for distributors and manufacturers in this process in general. So, even if you were to pick a great platform for your business, during implementation is difficult, right? We've been through it so many times with so many different customers, and the reality is it's very difficult. And so there's a bunch of decisions that have to get made. The first of which is, what does MVP look like, right? And so along the way, for a lot of B2B companies, a lot of distributors or manufacturers, they haven't been through this process before. So the only voice that's in the room is the agency or the vendor or whomever, right? And so there's no way for them to understand, like, am I being told the only options that are available, or are there other alternatives to, this course of additional customization, And so I think that in the end, they end up with a product that maybe even was further away from where they needed to be, because they didn't understand, going through the implementation process, the decisions that needed to be made all along the way. And it's tough. The implementations are, they're very involved.
Yeah. So talk to me about the new process. So with those kind of problems in mind,
Yeah.
what are you kind of recommending people do instead of, or what are you doing with the process that you're implementing right now?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is make everything faster and better all at the same time. Faster, more efficient, and better all at the same time. So faster, we can do a lot of the discovery with surveys. There still is some discovery. What's that?
What does a survey mean?
So basically what we've done, let me start at the end and kind of work backwards. What we've essentially done is solve for a lot of the use cases and a lot of the requirements that B2B companies should have anyway, right? And so now what we can do is we've built surveys that basically will help us understand, which of these apply to you, right? And how do you need it to work? Right. And so what used to take us lots of meetings to do and digging through processes and stuff like that, we can now do, at least in part, via surveys and stuff like that. So we send surveys out to the different departments. We have a marketing one, an IT one, an executive one, et cetera. And AI is definitely going to help in this process over time, because as we collect the data, AI is able to tell us certain things about that as well. But then we're able to take the requirements and put them into the platform that we built for this, where we can essentially have all of the user stories and all of the requirements in one place. Then we invite the vendors to come in and score their platforms against these specific requirements. And it's great for the vendors too, because once they've filled out the data, they don't have to fill it out the next time, right? They can, if they've had an upgrade to their product, or there's a little bit of a difference in terms of requirements or whatever, they can take care of those things as the case may be. But a lot of their answers that they would have for future projects that we're doing are already in the platform. So that allows us to basically take, and we have just so many data points around this portal, and allows us to not only take the scoring that the vendors have, but more importantly, to be able to mold it to what's truly important for the distributor or the manufacturer. So through that, we're able to even shape the results better so that they can understand from a scoring perspective, very objectively, what are the top platform or top 2 or 3 platforms that I should be looking at. And then from there, obviously we have demos, and those demos get scored too. So that's all part of the scoring process. And in the end, it's again, very objective for the distributor, the manufacturer, to see this is how these platforms scored against each other, and to ultimately decide the best platform for them out of the box.
So you have a list of, if I can restate this back,
Sure.
you have kind of a big library now of requirements and use cases and user stories that you're able to guide people through. And so you can guide them kind of individually, and then you can guide them through surveys. So surveys is getting kind of answers to what's important to them, business process, things like that. And so instead of starting from scratch with a manufacturer distributor, you're starting from kind of a starting script with that. Then you're appending that data with the surveys that you're getting. And these surveys go out to customers, or they go out to departments inside the manufacturer distributor?
Both.
Both. Okay.
We have surveys that go out to customers, and we also will do some individual calls with customers often. When you get a customer on the phone, invariably you will find out something you didn't know. Distributors or manufacturers, they often know lots about their customers, but there may be things they don't know, particularly as it relates to digital or e-commerce. So yeah, we've got surveys for the customers. We got feedback that we get from the customers, because ultimately, it has to start with the customer, right? It has to start with what the customer is going to want. But you can't go out and ask customers, what are the features and functionality you're looking for, right? Because they don't know. They're not thinking about that every day, right? So anyway, we have some surveys that we can send to the customers, and then other surveys that we'll send departmentally to the distributor's marketing department or IT department or executives, to collect as much as we can about those requirements, via surveys.
What percentage do you think you are able to capture of that process just kind of through the library and the surveys, compared to just sitting down and interviewing a bunch of departments and customers?
I would say we're probably between 50 to 60% today.
Okay.
I'd say that very shortly, I could see us being 2/3 to 75%, and hopefully even more than that very shortly. So it tends to, it really, once you get the aggregation of it going,
Yeah.
more and more projects, the tool gets smarter, surveys get smarter, and the AI gets smarter, right?
Well, and I think too, what you're saying too, Jay, is you're able to, I would imagine that 30-40% that's left is actually the unique
Correct.
things for that company, right? That you need to dig into.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not wasting that time doing the table stakes, or even just kind of common use cases. It doesn't have to be table stakes, just kind of common use cases across companies like that company.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're able to focus your discovery time on that 30% or 40%. And so you're probably able to do more due diligence and really try to uncover those kind of sticky business problems versus having to spec, because the other one just takes so much time to do.
Yeah. No, that's well said, and that's usually the way it works. We'll never be at 100%, because the reality is that there's some, every B2B business is different, right? We've never dealt with two that are the same. So there will always be some unique requirements with every company. But as the tool, gets better, we're probably covering off for more and more every time. So
The same question for the requirements then. So once you're able to build those requirements, you'll have a percentage of those that are unique to that company.
mm-hmm.
So that's never been seen, potentially never been seen by that platform, or
Right.
it might have been seen, but not in that format.
Yeah.
Same type of percentages like of requirements, or smaller or bigger for the actual vendor.
I think we'll get closer to 100% on that in aggregate, right? Because
Mm.
what ends up happening is over time we will have seen everything, right? It's going to be about what applies to you and how does that need to work for you. So it'll never be 100%, but I think we'll get pretty close. We may get 90% on a lot of these before too long. So,
Do you envision a world where you can basically gather the requirements, do surveys, that process, and then hit the button and it would spit out, here's the 3 platforms, like without even having to
yes.
go back to the vendors that they should pursue?
Yes, we're pretty much there now, where we would be able to shortlist, have a short list of vendors that we could just go directly to for demos and the rest of the process. Yeah,
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
yeah, yeah.
How much time do you think this saves?
Well, let's put it this way: we're in the middle of a selection process right now with a distributor, about $1 billion distributor, a highly complex job, number of sites, number of complexity around catalogs and distribution centers and operation orders, all of those things. I think we'll get this project done in probably 6 to 8 weeks, start to finish, and that includes agency selection, by the way. So the discovery and the requirements and all that stuff is going to be probably about a 4 week project. This would have been twice as long as this in the past. So
Well, it probably would have been 6 months
might have been.
easily, right? Wow, that's
Yeah,
pretty incredible.
it's fun.
And that's not a small, I mean, you're talking about $1 billion distributor,
Yeah,
not a small project either.
with 3 divisions and 12 sites, and yeah. At the end of the day, I think what I'm hopeful for is that B2B companies understand that they should engage a process, right? They should have a process. If there's one thing that whether they whoever they call or whatever, have a process. I think that's one thing that B2B companies just don't understand, is that it's complex, and you should have a process. And if you do that, I think you're going to have a whole lot better opportunity for success,
Yeah.
as opposed to just calling the vendors that or that another distributor had told you about or whatever.
So you read a wave, or whatever they're called, quadrant,
Quadrant
and
or a
things
wave.
like that, and
Yeah.
they're clear leaders and clear people in second place and fourth place. And do you see, is there a winner right now? Is there someone dominating this B2B e-commerce platform world right now?
I really don't see anybody that's dominating. I
Hmm.
think there's a number of people that are making some good inroads. I actually think, and this, we had this conversation in one of the pods that we did, talking about Shopify and some of the things that are happening there. I do think Shopify's entry into B2B is notable on in a lot of respects. I think it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. But I don't see one dominant player right now. I think there's a lot of shifting going on, and when you look at the fact that 2/3 of the market says they want to replatform, we'll see how many people their bosses are going to let them spend the money, or when it'll happen. But That means that if true, if even half of that's true, over the next couple of years, we're going to see some pretty big changes in terms of market share and, different platforms that are doing better than others in terms of sales and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot that's going to really change in the next couple of years. So
How much does budget of a customer of the manufacturer distributor that's replatforming, how much does budget play into the selection process?
you know, it's interesting. I think the short answer to your question is, in the past, budget has played a tremendous amount. I think that budget and risk, which in a sense are really the same issue, right? Budget from a standpoint of, like spending the money, but risk being the integration, right? People were afraid of the integration. It was, it was fearful to them. It's got to be integrated into the ERP, and people were afraid that that's where the project was going to die or whatever. So I think in the past, that's made a really big difference. My hope is B2B companies stop looking at what you spend in e-commerce and start looking at what you can make, right? And so, a platform that allows you to do a lot of merchandising to your existing customers is going to allow you to make more money. Along with that, you got to have process, right, on the blocking and tackling once you have the e-commerce site live. And in truth, right, there's a lot of companies that are struggling with that too, getting customer adoption. And it may be because of the platform. It may not necessarily be because of the platform. It may be because like they don't really have a process for that either, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've had some of the tools we had on Tech Tank, were ways to help break some of that down, motivate in particular. So there's a number of reasons, but I think in the end, B2B companies, distributors, manufacturers, realizing that, maybe even spending a little bit more if it's the right platform is going to get you more in the end. So, and it's easier said than done, right? But I think that's what's important about the process, because oftentimes when you think you're saving money with the platform, if you have to do a ton of customization, you will spend far more money in the end.
Yeah. At the same time, there's guardrails on it too, right? Like
Right.
there's just some platforms that are just going to be out of scope. How much does architecture play into, we keep hearing all the, and in the retail world, there's a lot of conversations about composable and headless, and I guess composable is the new headless. How much does that kind of thing play into distributors and manufacturers from your perspective?
I never once was a believer in the true composable approach for the overwhelming majority of B2Bs. And I say that not because it doesn't make sense logically. I say that because there's just a lot that goes with it in terms of implementation and maintenance long term. And so when you have, again, the complexity around some of the inner workings in B2B, it's going to inherently mean a lot of work, a lot of customizing, a lot of, if you're talking about true, microservices and stuff like that, it's a long-term commitment that a lot of B2B companies are just not able to make. They just can't support it long term. So I do think, go ahead.
If you're a $10 billion distributor with a large IT department doing a lot of custom code, I think that's a much different position to make those decisions than a $750 million or $1 billion distributor with an IT department that mainly supports their ERP and keeping the network up.
Correct. I've been at global companies where they attempted composable, and it wasn't, they weren't able to support it either. And it wasn't because of the platforms or the vendors. It was because they just didn't have a true understanding of what it was going to take for them to internally support it. And so eventually it failed. And that's a global 200 company right there. So
you are a coach inside of the B2B Commerce Association. We haven't talked much about that kind of program. What's your take on being a coach so far inside the association?
It's been great. It's been a great experience, particularly when, I have the opportunity to talk to people that are billion-dollar distributors and wanting to do tech selection projects, or other people that need help with product data and things like that. It's been terrific from that perspective as well. The ability to be able to help people and know that we're finally, I think, addressing some of the things in the community that I think are important. And that is just practitioner information, and I think that's the beautiful thing about all of this stuff. So, in the past, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have, you mentioned the reports. Analyst reports are really not built for the practitioner, right? They're built oftentimes for enterprise organizations, and if you look at the people that write those reports, most overwhelmingly, you won't see practitioners that have ever actually done it that are writing the bylines. And
but I wrote a report once, and I wasn't a practitioner, so that's not fair.
That's true. Your report was much different, though. So, I mean, we've got reports where leaders are listed and they don't have a lot of things that B2B companies would require out of the box, like quoting and other things. And so, how did they get to be leaders? What B2B companies are these reports referring to? I don't know.
When are we going to get the B2B Jay Schneider, or the Jay Schneider B2B market report?
It's
for
coming.
E-commerce platforms. You're working on it? You're going to work on it?
The groundwork is being laid as we speak.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah.
It's coming.
There's a lot going on. And the great thing is, as we help B2B companies, it gives us the opportunity to understand, what types of things they would be looking for in a report. And I look forward to working with some of the other coaches on it too. So
I think that's been the most striking thing for me, Jay, is in the coaching program. So we've got like just a handful of coaches that work that aren't connected. I mean, they're connected to the BDBA, but disconnected, meaning they run their own kind of independent consultants like Jay does. And my favorite part of it has been the relationships you guys have built and how you guys are doing business together now.
Yep.
You're starting to get business from each other, and obviously us as well. And then I just love I love the fact that you guys have actually found some meaningful relationships in there.
The one thing that I've learned is that, this e-commerce business has so many different elements to it. We're talking about technology selection on this pod, but we could be talking about product data, or we could be talking about order management, or we could be talking about merchandising, site merchandising, or search, or we could go down rabbit holes in any of these topics, right? And so there's no way that one person can know everything about what it is that really encompasses the entirety of accelerating e-commerce. And that, to me, it should be about accelerating e-commerce, because the reality is this is, and I think sometimes the distributors and manufacturers, as they're appraising their timelines and stuff, don't realize this is going to change very, very soon. And I think that's one of the things that Shopify's entrance into this is going to, I think, precipitate. And that is potentially new entrants, right? And when you see new entrants, that's when things really start changing fast. So,
yeah, I agree with that. Jay, where do people find you? How do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, you can obviously DM me anytime on LinkedIn. And also the website is B2B Squared. So B, the number 2, B, like we normally do in our nomenclature, and then squared.com.
We'll put that in the show notes as well. Amazing, Jay. I really appreciate you being here. That's cool. I think this e-commerce platform thing is a big mess I wrote, do you remember my Agile RFP
I absolutely do.
document?
I was looking at it. Ironically, I was looking at it here a couple of weeks ago.
So I wrote an Agile RFP. I think I wrote that in 2015.
Yep.
I wrote this document called the Agile RFP, which basically said like you can go through this process, which is like gather requirements, put them in an Excel spreadsheet,
Yep.
submit them to vendors, get the responses. Everybody answers the
Right.
same way. Bring them in, select the wrong vendor, or you can like really it was about user stories, right?
Right.
Why don't
Yeah.
you skip
It
to the
was.
user stories
Yep.
and why don't you bring a group of people in for a Hell Week? I think I called it.
Yep.
And it was a fun thing. And, you know, at the end of the day, we didn't have the technology though to aggregate like you've done. I think the technology that you've built to help serve the discovery part, the Q&A survey part, the matching, the kind of curation of vendors
Mhm.
from that list,
Yep.
and then to score them. You know, anyone that's out there that's looking for a new platform, really at any point, and really any point in the next 2 years, right?
Yeah.
You should reach out to Jay. He's independent. He's agnostic.
Right.
I think that's a big point, Jay.
It's a
Is
huge
that
point.
like Jay doesn't have a horse in the race.
I don't care which platform you pick.
He doesn't care what platform you pick, and most companies have a horse in the race
Yeah.
that they won't necessarily talk about, but they have a horse in the race. And what Jay said in the beginning was if you approach an agency about doing an e-commerce selection process, they're most likely going to point you to a group of products that they support because that's good for them. It's good for their business.
Yeah.
And Jay does this uniquely where Jay has this super deep understanding of the e-commerce platform market, and he doesn't care who you pick, but he wants you to pick knowing as much of the pros and cons of that platform as possible.
Right.
So you go in it. I remember we did this selection. This is a funny story. I remember we did this selection at B2X. Jay and I worked together at B2X Partners and did this selection. And at the end of it, they picked the platform. And I said, and I remember talking to the CEO. I said, listen, you're picking this platform. You know as much as I know about this platform. And it was, I knew quite a bit. I said, I just want you to know in 6 months, you're going to call me up and want to punch me in the face for you picking this platform. You're going to remember this conversation and you're going to apologize that you even were frustrated with me because you picked this platform.
Right.
With the full knowledge or as much knowledge as possible of what was going to come. You knew the pros and cons of the others. You knew the pros and cons of this one, and you selected it.
Right.
And I'm proud of you for selecting it. And you're going to hate that you selected it, not because of the platform, but because you're going to run up against problems, right? And that was back in like 2017, 2018. But I always remember his face when I said that to him because he appreciated it. He was like, thank you for saying that.
I remember a selection. I don't know if it's the same one you're talking about, but the e-commerce guy, the data said that there was one platform they should choose, and they chose a different one, somewhat because of cost, I think.
Sure.
And he came back to me a year or so later and said, you remember you said it was going to be a nightmare? You said it was worse. It was worse than you told us.
That's what happened a year. In fact, I still see him every once in a while.
Okay.
And 6 months, 9 months later, he calls me up on the phone. I'm like, hey, how's it going? Like we didn't do implementation. So that's why we didn't have a horse in the race. Calls me up 6, 9 months later. I said, hey, how's it going? He said, I want to punch you in the face.
Right.
And he said, but I remember our conversation. I said, I still like you.
Yeah, it is.
And I said, I appreciate that. I said, tell me what's going on. And then we actually worked through, helped him work through some issues.
Yeah.
It's just a funny, there's it's kind of like it's a really hard decision to make. There are pros and cons to everyone. It's about making the best fit
Right.
across everything: budget, requirements, time, platforms, integration. Like there's so many aspects, Jay.
I think of it almost as like team building, right? Like, I've had really good success in my career at hiring people. And, people have asked me, well, why is, particularly salespeople, people have asked me, well, why is that? And, it, I look at it a couple of ways. Well, because I have a process on the front end to find the right fit for me, right? Like it doesn't matter like whether they're great for somebody else or not. It matters, can they work with me? Can they perform to the level that we need them to on the team? And then you support them, right? You have to be able to support them in their onboarding and everything else. So this is very similar in that sense. It's like you want to make sure you have a process to pick the right platform, but then you still have to support it, right? And you're not going to, as you've said in many times, hope is not a strategy, right?
That's right. That's a really strong analogy, Jay. I took this question from Simon Sinek a couple years ago and started using it when I talk to people, and even when I was doing consulting work, I would actually say this. I would ask the question, "Hey, I don't like being surprised. Can you tell me now why I'm going to be disappointed in you?" I think it's probably one of the best conversations to ask in a platform selection.
Yeah.
I don't want to be surprised. Can you just tell me now why I'm going to be disappointed from your platform, your people, your agency, your SI, whatever it might be? Can we just have that conversation now,
Right?
So that we can prepare for it, right, and deal with that risk? At the end of the day, I think that's the most valuable thing that you do, Jay, is you help people understand not just what's the best fit, but also, hey, when you're in this situation, like, here's the things that you're going to be disappointed about down the road.
Right.
And to think you're not going to be disappointed is such a...
Well, right. To think that, it's, it's like anything, your relationships or whatever, like you're always going to have struggles. There's always going to be a challenge. And, at least with doing it this way, people know going in, well, you know what? I need this platform because it handles the order management side. It handles the account management side. It handles all of this complexity in my orders, in my branches and everything else that I want to deliver to customers. It handles that complexity well. Maybe it's a little light on the CMS. Like maybe the CMS isn't exactly where I need it to be today. I'm okay with that. Like, I've accounted for that, right? Because and for some people, the CMS is more important, right? They're more interested in what are the things that they can do on the front end in terms of the customer experience. So one thing that I do want to make sure that I mention, though, is we're talking about e-commerce. The idea here is that this tool will be used for
good point,
PIM, which we're working on right now, as well as hopefully other things, third-party search, other platforms as well. So, it's the same concept. Like we want to have a process going into it to decide who's better, right?
Yeah.
And I think particularly in like the PIM area, I really feel like there's just a great opportunity. I think PIM in general is mystifying. It's another conversation for another pod, right? But I think PIM in general is mystifying to people, product data and PIM. So helping folks sort that out, I think is the next really great opportunity. So
I think I look forward to Jay having a report that it's data based, analytics based, that says when, or it may be even interactive, right? That says when you're this type of customer that wants this type of thing with this type of thing with this type of thing, here's the best. Like instead of the magic quadrant, it's a 3-dimensional interactive thing that people can say, here are the platforms ranked for that. because a
Right.
distributor is different from a manufacturer, right?
No question.
And
Yep.
they have different requirements, and those distinctions become very significant at the edges, like at the extremes of that.
Right.
When I'm a manufacturer, when I'm this size, when I have this budget, when I have these people, when I have these
Right.
requirements, these are the platforms. And I see this vision for you being able to create a, not just a report, but a tool to help companies walk through. Maybe not even like 1, 2, 3. I don't think that's appropriate.
Right.
But here are the companies that meet those requirements in the best way. And then here's the second tier of companies that meet that, those requirements.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, here's a questionnaire and based on your responses, here's the 3 or 4 platforms that line up best, right off the bat.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And that's where I do think, we've already got some AI that's in the tool today. I don't, we'll see where all that is going, but I think the opportunity is immense. So
that's incredible. Love it, Jay. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.